what we're talking about in this body field is basically all the different fields that are generated in the body. But we're saying, look, it's not just this sort of useless exhaust that you can pick up with different devices. It also actually influences your health, and basically what you want to do is make that body field, or the fields of the body, as efficient as you possibly can. Because if it's efficient, you use less energy. You know, if you use less energy, you have more resources to heal. And you know, again, from a quite a simplistic point of view, if you're looking at health, if your body has enough resources and energy available to elicit a healing response, you know, it can basically heal itself. If you're really low in energy, what does the body want to do? Well, it conserves energy, and it won't heal, and you know, you go down with disease. And this is as another example of that. If you look at cancer, or if you look at cells in the body with people who have cancer, a healthy cell across the cell membrane produces around 250 millivolts. Some of cancer generally is less than 50 millivolts. Most diseases are between between 50 and 150 millivolts, and you know, 150 to 250 is sort of just low energy, and anything above 250, you're really super healthy. And so, yeah, so the whole idea is basically you want enough energetic potential so that your body has plenty of energy to be able to heal itself. And all we're trying to do in bioenergetics is just get your use of energy as efficient as we possibly can. And you know, there's a lot of ways of doing that. And of course, we also want to exchange energy with the environment, and that's all your normal stuff like exercise, eat right, you know, go out in the sunshine, etc., etc.
Hi, welcome back. I'm Eric Edmeades. I'm your host of Thrive Time, and I'm here today with a very great guest, Harry Massey. And I've known Harry Massey for some time, and the main reason I know Harry is because we're fellow kiteboarders. But it turns out that, as I have been finding with so many of my good friends, that when I bring them into this show and I end up having to do some research on them, I find out that they're significantly more amazing and dynamic than they ever let on. Harry, in 2002, founded Energy for Life, a company dedicated to restoring people's energy and health. And you invented some really cool technologies that help health practitioners assist their clients creating more comfort and health from their own home. I think it's fabulous stuff. It's way beyond my capacity for understanding technology, but maybe we can dig into that a little bit. And you've also written and directed a number of movies. You did The Living Matrix, The New Science of Healing. You did, let's see, what was the other one here? Choice Point, Align Your Purpose, and Supercharged Movie.com. So you've done some really cool creative stuff, and I've been to your house for a New Year's party. So I mean, what else more can I say? Harry, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.
Good to have you. So Harry, frankly, I'm kind of excited to dig in and learn a little bit about the technology you developed, because I've never really had a chance to have that conversation with you. But first, I want to talk to you about what is most important to me right now. And the thing that's most important to me right now is immune system support. You know, about 2 weeks ago, I got frustrated with people not paying attention to the social distancing warnings and all that kind of stuff. But I got even more frustrated by the fact that that's one aspect of the advice. But, you know, social distancing and washing hands will only get you so far if you're incredibly unhealthy and not supporting your immune system. And so I've been railing on about that. I put out a video that went medium viral all over the place. And so that actually is what stimulated me creating this show. I've had some fascinating guests in talking about immune support. And so I want to talk to you. I would like to know from your perspective, what is most important for people right now to make sure they've got a strong and robust immune system? And sorry, Harry, I'm so sorry. It's so bad form to cut you off. I want to also point out that you're not a tradition, you're not a doctor, you're not the traditional person here, but you're in many ways similar to me, that you were sick for a really long time and unable to find the answers in traditional ways. And you put your research hat on and you unlocked some incredible mysteries. So I'm really intrigued by the way you think and the way you approach this. So now you can answer.
Now I can answer. Perfect. But yeah, well, I'm going to say something a little bit contrarian. So there's really two aspects that I'd love to dig into over the next half an hour or so. One is this concept of emotional immunity, and the other is this concept of you have basically general viral theory of disease, but you also have terrain theory of disease, and those two split out 100 years ago with pretty severe consequences in today's pandemic.
Are you talking about the Pasteur versus Beauchamp's conversation?
Yeah, exactly. So if we look at emotional immunity, which I think is really, really key right now, the mass media has basically got us all into panic. What does panic do? It makes us fearful. It makes us anxious. It makes us lonely. Obviously, it locks us down into our houses, might make us depressed, etc., etc. Now, if we didn't think this whole virus thing was going on, would we want to expose ourselves to all those negative emotions? And the other question you want to ask is, what do all those negative emotions actually have, or what impact do they have on terms of health? And basically, the research is pretty clear about this, but basically all those negative emotions that we just mentioned, you only produce half the antibodies than you would if you were in a positive state. And this statistic is really, really horrible, that no one's going to like, is you're 3 times more likely to catch a cold, flu, or virus if you're basically expressing negative emotions. Now, I don't want to really go and say that we shouldn't be doing social distancing, but I am going to point out that some of the effect of this sort of the panic from mass media and government imposed social distancing, it is actually going to lower our immune systems. But as it is, we're actually in that situation. So obviously, we can't go against sort of government recommendations.
Yeah, Harry, I'd love to offer two, I'm with you on that completely. And I want to offer 2 thoughts. One is, I'm really ultimately, I have the rule of thumb. I like to measure everything against evolutionary theory. And so I will give you my theory as to why our immune systems do that, because sometimes when people understand the why, it makes it easier for them to act. But my view is that the best metaphor I can give you is that you're on the Star Trek Enterprise, and you've reached a point where there's something so severe going on in your life that your immune system is irrelevant. And so you divert power from the shields to the thrusters to get the hell out. And so I believe that the reason that our immune system depresses like that under stress is that in that moment, the bigger problem is the lion, the tiger, the other person, the attacker. And our biggest the thing we need to be doing in that moment is acting super quickly, which means we need to let go of some logic, we need to let go of some intelligence, and we need to let go of some empathy, because we need to take care of ourselves and quickly. And so we raise these stress chemicals, we lower our shields, our immunity's down, we get away, and then when we get away, we put the shields back up. And
because that doesn't actually work if the threat is a so-called virus that's going to attack your immune system.
But that's kind of the point, is that while there's a virus out there, you don't want to lower your shields. And the problem is, I think a lot of people are looking at this, they're producing the stress chemicals of an immediate threat because of things like imposed social distancing and all the media noise and all that kind of stuff, which means they're lowering their shield right at the point in time when they need their shields up.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're looking at within the body of what are the actual core ways that we can boost our emotional immunity, I mean, a good place to go is back to Chinese medicine. The Chinese, they basically identified these 5 core emotions, but only one of them was a positive one, which was joy, which is related to the heart. So from a general principle, anything that you can do to help the heart, like meditate, do breathing exercises,
hugs,
yeah, exactly, and social distancing. I put a post up on Facebook called social connection during social distancing, where we basically ran a yoga class at home. But yeah, and anything you can do to heighten your HRV during this process is basically going to be good.
Yeah, no question about it. It's funny, I made the joke about hugs because I am one of those. I'm sure you've seen the video now. The guy, the camera's in on him, and it's like, there's a major pandemic going. You have a choice: A, get locked up with your wife and children, or B. I take B. Yeah. And I unfortunately am that guy. My kids and well, one of my children lives in Canada anyway, but Zoe and Elise and Candy, who lives with us, are all in the US, and I'm actually completely in isolation on my own. And I got to tell you, a week in now, I'm really, I mean, as introverted as I am, I'm really noticing that we have to pay attention to that. I can't have a hug, you know, that's a difficult thing for those people who are at home and maybe getting like kind of short tempered or a little like feeling like there's a little too much. I want to remind them that is a lot nicer than those people not being there.
Yeah,
totally the case.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about, I think that people are facing an onslaught of information. Clearly, I think people can handle that because they could filter it out a lot. Like I've been telling people, if you're on Instagram, delete anybody who scares you. Just stop it. Like, you know, delete anybody who's not inspiring you or empowering you, or delete anybody who's just producing canned content that their social media company wrote 4 weeks ago. Delete that crap. You know, get with people that are really inspiring you and empowering you and and raising your vibration and working on the heart. But, you know, we have to balance that with also being aware of what's going on around us. What are some of the practices that you would recommend to help people create a real sense of emotional immunity, where they can, even though there are some genuine sort of changes and differences and stresses around us, what can we do to, in a sense, fool our bodies and make our bodies feel like things are okay, and make sure that our immune system stays up?
I think hugs is definitely a good one. Developing empathy. Obviously, we're using Zoom right now. I mean, if you are a bit disconnected.
Harry, my little girl hugged the phone yesterday.
Oh, that's cute.
You know, I'm doing video calls with her, and the picture went all crazy, and I didn't know what was going on. And then they told me that she was hugging the phone.
Yeah, I mean, you can actually use it as a great excuse to connect all your long distance family. I mean, the fact that you're isolated, you can actually just pick up the phone and start calling people. And I don't know about for you, but in a way, I've probably spoken to more people on the phone the last 2 weeks than I did in the last 3 months. So in a way, you can actually just use it as an excuse to actually build connection.
Yeah, I believe so. I'm in the same boat. I have rekindled, not even rekindled, just, you know, living the way I live, similar to you. You know, I'm on the road a lot, and it's really easy to get, it's really easy to just sort of drift apart from people. You know, you still love them, you still care about them, but you don't necessarily get to connect with them. And I've just had some of the most gorgeous, deep, connective conversations, and I think this is a really good time for that. And you know what, I always feel good afterward. You know, I put the phone down, and my house doesn't feel quite as empty, and it's a very different experience. Plus, you know, my little comment about this is, you know, thank God this didn't happen 10 years ago. And if anybody wants to test that theory, all they got to do is go back and unplug their router. Figure out what it would be like to live without food delivery, without Netflix, without Skype, without WhatsApp, you know, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, and on top of the 2008 financial crisis, that would have been a really massive whirlwind.
That might have been a little compounding a little bit much. Harry, talk to me a little bit about, you know, you know, we're interconnected very well. We've got a lot of common friends. And so we were often at events together, but we don't often get a chance to kind of go really deep. I'd like to learn a little bit about your health journey. I mean, you were dealing with like chronic fatigue and a bunch of other issues, and you went into this huge research project. And in the end, you've become a technology guy working on creating phenomenal solutions for people in health. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So when I was 21, three things happened. One, I got a viral infection. I basically got glandular fever, and it started basically just getting post-viral fatigue for the next few months. While I was in that post-viral fatigue, I went ice climbing up Ben Nevis, and I ended up falling off the mountain and fracturing my spine. And then the third thing, actually I came out as being gay to my family, and then I had a whole load of sort of family issues. But in short, we had these sort of three major stressors, you know, one viral, one environmental, and, you know, one emotional and one physical. And who knows which of the triggers, or it was all three of those triggers, but that basically triggered a 7-year bedridden episode of chronic fatigue syndrome. And well, it was pretty bad, but it basically got to the state that actually I re-enrolled in an MBA, but I had to do that in a wheelchair over 2 years instead of 1 year. And then after that, I basically got stuck at home with my parents. And I was always trying to look for a cure, or trying to get better. And I went through the conventional medical system, tried every blood tests you can imagine. They couldn't really work out what was wrong. Went down the sort of functional medicine and nutritional route for, I think, about two to 3 years. Tried every single diet under the sun. I did things like Gerson therapy, where you're doing coffee enemas 2-3 times a day and drinking gallons and gallons of juice. But I basically didn't have the energy to sustain it. And I probably tried, what else did I try? Like homeopathy, tons of ozone, you name it, I would have done it. One of the more extreme things I did is I did a 3-week water fast, which was pretty interesting. But I dropped down from 12 stone to 8 stone, and I ended up passing this bucket of worms, of parasites, which was really, really gross. And it was actually from that point that I ended up completely bedridden. And yeah, I mean, I think that took me about a year and a bit to actually get walking strength again. And after about 6 years, where I'd really tried all of these things and was in a pretty desperate state, I just basically just thought, well, where on earth does energy come from? So I didn't have any energy. And that's how I stumbled on the internet to this idea of bioenergetics. And bioenergetics basically just stands for the study of energy in living systems. And then the second idea I was having at the same time is I was having to get my parents to drive me to a doctor. So they would drive me up to London I think it was about every 3-4 months. I would see this chronic fatigue specialist for 15 minutes, at some vast expense, and then I would be driven home again. I was like, yeah, this isn't really very good. And I just thought it'd be really good if there was some way of working out what was wrong with you from home, because I thought, well, if I could work that out, I might get better. 2, it might help get other people better. And then I had a third motivation, which was I really didn't want to be under my parents. And I wasn't quite sure if I was going to be disabled for a long time, but I thought if I had more of an income, I could have a nurse or something like that. And yeah, long and short, those sort of 2 things ended up being combined, and we had this idea to create a home wellness system that these days is called the Bioenergetic Wellness System. We, just like the universe does these things, we had sort of this 1,000,000,000-to-1 chance where we were introduced to this scientist from Australia called Professor Fraser, who'd been mapping out the energy of the human body field over the past 25 years, where he basically taken original Chinese medicine research for the acupuncture system and then gone into a lot more granular detail of how energy flows through the meridians and the information systems work. And we ended up hooking up, and he took me on as a patient, and ended up basically ending up giving me what are now called infoceuticals to trigger different healing responses. And together we ended up making this overall system that took about another 2 years from then.
And can you give me a sense, like what types of things are you working with? What is it effective with? Who and how does it kind of work?
Sure. So basically, bioenergetics stands for the study, detection, and correction of energy in living systems. And really, there's really just two major sides to bioenergetics. One is this idea that our body basically has energy and is really acting as a body battery. So, yeah. So if you imagine, we're sitting here, we're breathing in oxygen, breathing out carbon dioxide. We go out in sunlight, get energy from the sun. We eat food. So basically, we're always exchanging energy. And so, from a bioenergetics point of view, you really basically want to top up the amount of energy that's in you and get your energy usage as efficient as you can. So that's sort of one side of it. And then the other side of it is how that energy is being used. And you want energy to be as efficient as it possibly can. And what controls that is is basically the body's overall control system that we call the body field. And simply put, it's not totally simple, but I'll start.
It doesn't sound so simple.
It doesn't sound so simple. But basically, you're just trying to get energy to be as efficient as you can in the body. But for some physics, for people who love physics, so Einstein had a number of amazing quotes, but two of his great quotes were E equals mc squared, which just means that energy is equivalent to matter. She's basically just saying that actually all matter is energy. And the second one is sort of more profound, which is that the field is the sole governing force of the particle. What he's saying there is basically particle or mass doesn't really matter. It's all being held in place by a field. And he was basically talking about as a field of information. Now, if you apply that to the body, you can basically say the body field, i.e. the fields of the body, are the sole governing force of life. And so you basically have within biology this field, and people think, well, what, my body doesn't produce fields. Well, if you look at your heart and you use an EKG, you can detect that with an EKG.
Well, yeah, an EKG wouldn't work if that wasn't true.
It wouldn't work if it wasn't true. You can, there's brain waves with EEGs, things like, let's say, like an MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. So in completely conventional medicine, actually, medicine looks at fields in the body all the time. Yeah. The only thing medicine doesn't do is they don't look at it at the other way around. They don't say,
they look at the field as the result.
Yeah, they just look at the result. They don't think it's actually doing anything in the body, which, why on earth would the body be producing those fields if they didn't do anything? That's sort of nonsensical, really. And so what we're talking about in this body field is basically all the different fields that are generated in the body. But we're saying, look, it's not just this sort of useless exhaust that you can pick up with different devices. It also actually influences your health, and basically what you want to do is make that body field, or the fields of the body, as efficient as you possibly can. Because if it's efficient, you use less energy. If you use less energy, you have more resources to heal. And again, from quite a simplistic point of view, if you're looking at health, if your body has enough resources and energy available to elicit a healing response, it can basically heal itself. If you're really low in energy, what does the body want to do? Well, it conserves energy, and it won't heal, and you go down with disease. And this is as another example of that. If you look at cancer, or if you look at cells in the body with people who have cancer, a healthy cell across the cell membrane produces around 250 millivolts. Some of cancer generally is less than 50 millivolts. Most diseases are between between 50 and 150 millivolts, and 150 to 250 is sort of just low energy, and anything above 250 you're really super healthy. And so so the whole idea is basically you want enough energetic potential so that your body has plenty of energy to be able to heal itself. And all we're trying to do in bioenergetics is just get your use of energy as efficient as we possibly can. And there's a lot of ways of doing that. And of course, we also want to exchange energy with the environment, and that's all your normal stuff like exercise, eat right, go out in the sunshine, etc., etc. All
right, you got to help me out here. One thing I'm really aware of is that what we think is crazy and insane in one era, isn't in another. What is considered to be airy-fairy and out there in one decade is science in the next. And in fact, one of my favorite examples of this is that if you're looking for an example of masculinity and you watch Sean Connery in a James Bond movie, you'd be shocked to find out that he's just like the exact example of what Me Too was all about. Back then it was masculinity, today it's something else. So we're always changing views. For example, we'll definitely come back to the Pasteur versus Beauchamp's conversation. But here's the thing. I consider myself fairly open-minded, but I also consider myself mostly a Newtonian physicist rather than too heavily outside in, like, say, the quantum untouchable. I mean, as much as I'm a Star Wars fan and I like to use the Force, I also like to pick up an actual thing. So I understand absolutely the body has energy fields. I don't think that's open for debate. As we said, you wouldn't be able to, an EKG wouldn't work, a brain scan wouldn't work if there wasn't energy to measure. And so I understand, from my perspective, I could see very much having a device that would measure that energy field. And as a consequence of the measurement of that field, much like, say, measuring the exhaust of a car, we can tell what's going on with the car and therefore make adjustments to the car. What I'm unclear about is how does one
how does the control system work?
How does it go backwards? How do you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's briefly just talk about the chemical control system and its flaws, and then we'll talk about the field-based control system.
Sure.
So conventionally speaking, we all think basically, we eat all this food, all these chemicals run around our bodies, molecules bump into each other, create more molecules, and all these things happen. So just for a minute, think about these, just a few questions. So you basically have 1 trillion operations happening in your body in every single second. How on earth, now somehow all of that is orchestrated basically it's orchestrated in real time, instantaneously and perfectly. And just imagine, you just gave the example that we all get in a panic and shock. So let's say something fearful happens. So okay, in the chemical version, our adrenals pump out adrenaline, maybe pump out some more thyroxine. Okay, well then that chemical travels around the blood. How long does that take? 25 seconds to get to your leg or whatever it is, and then it can do something. It's too slow. I mean, that it's not that those chemicals don't reach there, they do. But it's basically, if you think everything's going to happen through molecules bumping together, too slow. So that's one little thing. Now let's look at the nervous system, because that's one of the other sort of traditional control systems. The nervous system is really, really weird, but the spine is so thick, and if I look at my little finger, I can't remember exactly, but it's basically millimeters thick. And so you basically have this, and also the nervous system is discontinuous because it's basically joined up through basically chemical joints, and then it goes back to a nerve. And a signal travels through all the nerves at completely different rates right across the body. And again, if you take, let's take a baseball player, he manages to hit that ball perfectly, right out of the baseball park, and he manages to get the ball, to hit the bat perfectly. That doesn't quite happen through just normal nerve transmission. Now, if you look at the nervous system as basically a way of setting up a field for information to travel on the top, not so much different to a cell phone, i.e. the signal, it's not actually traveling down the nerve sheath and then going through chemicals and then traveling again. Basically the field is above it, and the information is carried on above that.
So
then
can
that's
I
more
use
possible.
this clumsy metaphor that in the chemical model of the world, we're basically on hardline, and whereas in the field version, you're saying the body's communicating by Wi-Fi to a degree.
Yeah, basically, I mean, it's actually, you could almost say it infinitely more times efficient, but people say it's 1,000 times more efficient.
Yeah, of course.
It's basically it's pretty much instantaneous through fields, and through chemicals
we have proof of that too, just from a human anecdotal, like when something happens that frightens you, you can feel it like instant, like you get that shock in your legs, like immediately. That cannot be chemical that fast, right? Like that, it would take a while for that to happen. So there's something else that's creating that immediate feeling in all the muscles, and so what you're saying is the chemical is the result of that feeling.
Yeah, it gets there. It's like it's like a backup system. I mean, it's just another system. I mean, the body has many systems of communication, but every cell, if you're looking, like if we were looking at a cell membrane, you have all of these little protein receptors. Now, some of these receptors are basically tuned into chemical messages. Some of these receptors are tuned into field-based messages, and as you say, basically the field-based message gets there first.
Got you. Okay, I think I understand that. So now talk to me about, you've got somebody with a health challenge, and you want to go the other course. You want to go on field-based treatment. How are you? What are you doing? What is the mechanism by which we are reversing that? Where we're, rather than saying we're going to fix it in the physical world over here, which will eventually affect the field, we're going to go and we're going to do something with the field that's going to respond in the physical world. How does that work?
So two ways. But basically we use information. I mean, well, so if you have a field, the thing that we want to do is enter new information into that field so that the body responds in the right way. And so all you really want to do is basically take an optimal blueprint of how, like, if you can take an optimal blueprint of how a liver cell works, or how a nervous system cell works, or a kidney cell works, you can record that information, and then you can transmit that information back. And then we have, well, two ways that we do that. One, we use basically an electromagnetic device that we call the MyHealth, and we basically just beam that information straight into the body. And then the second way we do it is we basically imprint information into structured water, and then you just drink the water. Now, on that method, takes a little bit of explaining, but not too much. If you go back a couple of 100 years ago to Hahnemann, like Hahnemann was the father of homeopathy. He was really the first to sort of use that idea. The slight problem in homeopathy is he was basically doing an indirect type of message. So he was taking something like a plant called Nux vomica. If you ate that plant, you would vomit, but if you take a very, very dilute amount of it, the body will respond and basically it's like a hormetic type response, and the body will strengthen so that it won't vomit, so it'll heal your stomach. That's all good, but well, no, I'll go forward 150 years. So then a Nobel Prize winner called Benavista basically started studying how information could be imprinted into water, and it was actually completely accidental, but he was an immunologist. He was looking at a mast cell, and he had an allergen in solution, and they removed the allergen, but the water was still there, and he noticed that the mast cell reacted in the same way as if they had the allergen. He thought, well, that's a little bit odd. He ran the experiment many times, and it basically worked out. He tried to publish the paper in Nature. Nature refused, but said they would if he got the experiment repeated in another 3 labs. He had it repeated in another 3 labs, and Nature was forced to publish it, but they put a note saying they didn't believe it. A year and a half later, he ended up dead for sort of unknown, slightly suspicious causes. Then basically no scientist would touch this idea that water has a memory. It was seen as A, as a joke, and B, as a sort of political hot potato. Another Frenchman who was actually the discoverer of AIDS, or he won a Nobel Prize for discovering AIDS, which was Luc Montagnier. He was obviously into viruses. He did an amazing experiment where he made an electronic copy of a virus. He added some of the base, like ACTH, which are the basically the base enzymes, into another beaker, transmitted the information into it, and then the virus was basically recreated from the field information and the raw material. Basically, you add the instructions of the raw material and the energy, and a virus will get created. Sort of all well and good. He's actually now works and lives in China because he wasn't funded in Europe. I ended up meeting this scientist called Peter Fraser, and one of the first things that I said to him, I was like, well, why aren't we looking at the body from a positive point of view? So actually, he was still in that slightly opposite disease type way of like, you make a copy of some toxin or allergen or virus, and God knows it was just accidental, idiotic 26-year-old. I was just said to him, why don't we record the information of how things are in the body when they're optimal. And he was like, oh, that's a good idea. So then he basically started. Maybe I won't get into the science of matching, but basically he started recording the information of all these different healthy samples. Like we would take healthy meridians and basically all these different cellular tissues, like just thousands of samples. We recorded that information, and then we would just then imprint that information into structured water, and then basically drink that, which is actually to your earlier question of how I got better. I basically met Peter. We had that discussion of that idea, and then he started making these infoceuticals, which I basically experimented with. It was around 10 years, the full journey. But the first 2 years, I got most of my health back. And like, for example, I can tell you some of the things that happened. So one of the first things he made was an antidote to a group of flaviviruses, and I basically got this 2 to 3 day fever, and then the fever went away. I wasn't healed in that first week or anything like that, but I knew, because I had this immune reaction just from taking this what we now call an infoceuticals. Like, oh god, there's something in this. Then one of the next remedies we made was something called emotional stress release. I was extremely wired, but extremely tired in those days. And when I took that, the wiredness, the wired part started dissolving, and I just became tired. But if you become tired, then you're not using as much energy. Basically you're resting, and then so your body's able to heal, because I think it's very similar to that emotional immunity concept. If you're super stressed, you're not, obviously you have no, well, you're not using energy for healing, you're just using it for the stress. And there's a gazillion little examples of all of these infoceuticals that he was experimenting with at the time that I would take and get all of these amazing reactions. So we did that for about a couple of years, and then that basically developed out into the system.
So I have a question. I mean, we know, for example, that placebo has an impact on people. I mean, is it conceivable that you just have such a strong belief in water that your body's having a reaction? Or I imagine that he's done extensive study on this.
Well, it's a super interesting question, placebo, because I'll answer that, but I'll also say, the placebo is actually something. It's actually something that you want everyone to have. It's just one of my wishes. It's like, out of the, I don't know how much it is, but trillions of dollars that has been spent into drug research. Can you imagine if just $1 billion was spent of like, how can we harness and get the placebo effect to happen?
No kidding, I'm with you.
It would be.
Do you know my good friend Robbie? Do you know my good friend Robbie Richmond?
I do, the X pill.
X pill, and I hope he figures out a way to get $1 billion of research into that, because we absolutely know scientifically that stuff works. And you're right. If we'd taken a fraction of the pharmaceutical investment and put it into the psychology of healing, I wonder if we could have done some good.
Yeah, no, definitely. But what my view of the placebo is, it's all part of the control system. So what we're calling the body field, you could call the control system. But it's also connected to thought, and thought itself is it is one of the most direct ways to influence the body field and your body's control system. That basically is placebo. So we have another way of influencing it. Obviously, thought is a great way too, and if we can, we want to stack all of those up. But to answer that question, what's really interesting is using it on animals. So an animal basically doesn't know. It doesn't even know you added it to the water. And we actually find we get better results with animals and kids than we generally do with adults. And that's simply because the animal and kid doesn't, they don't have the nocebo effect or the placebo effect. And they don't have any doubts. So it just works. We should probably talk a bit about the nocebo, because I think that's fascinating with what's going on. The nocebo. The classic example is when someone gets a cancer diagnosis and then the doctor says, you've got 3 months to live, you need to write your will and, you know, sort out your
And
things.
then oddly, so the doctor turned out to be incredibly prophetic, and they had 3 months to live.
Yeah, exactly. And then they die. And then there's, you know, there's a different set of people who are like, I'm not listening to that. And they, you know, they go and do all these amazing things and live for years.
A friend of mine, not a very good friend. I've, you know, known him for some years and haven't seen him for many, but I met him through Tony Robbins many years ago. And he shared the story about that happening with his mother. She's in the hospital and the doctor comes in one day and says, you know, she's going to die. And you gotta prepare her for that. And Joseph said to him, I accept your diagnosis, but not the prognosis. And you must not repeat that to her. And he goes, well, I have to, it's the code. I have to go tell her. And he basically physically made it clear to the doctor that telling his mother was not his prognosis was not good if he told the mother. And so he then went out and got, went for a different method of things. Like, you know, went and rent, back in the old days, this is a VHS player, but he went and invented a VHS player, brought in a TV, sat for hours with her, watched all the funny movies, and just kind of started supporting her emotionally and deciding to go down a different track than telling her that she had a window. And she lived for years after that, as far as I know the story. And so I'm with you. The nocebo effect is something that I think,
well, it's really real. And
and we have to be careful.
And I hate to say it, but well, I don't hate to say it. I think everyone should realize, I mean, what on earth is going on globally right now is just this huge nocebo. And will we ever know the deaths and symptoms that are attributed to the nocebo from what's going on now?
All right, look, you're opening that can of worms. Let's have the conversation, which I've not had for years. But we're talking that Louis Pasteur and Beauchamp's both at the same time, coming up with their different theories. He comes up with the germ theory and viruses, and Beauchamp's comes along and says, no, the virus is actually a byproduct of the condition in the body. And, you know, that there's, you know, like the sort of a single cause of disease. Talk to me about that. You brought it up and I'm fascinated.
Sure. So, you know, 120 plus years ago, it even goes before that. So originally when they could discover the bacteria, they were like, okay, bacteria causes disease. And then the problem was, is an awful lot of people were getting ill that they couldn't find any bacteria for. So they basically invented the concept of a virus that might be something that is smaller, that they basically, you know, couldn't see, that wasn't a bacteria that would be causing disease. And so viral theory existed I think it's at least 40, 50 years, arguably 500 years before that. I won't even get into that. But 40 years before the electron microscope could ever see it. Then the electron microscope appeared, and then there's a whole load of stuff of, like, when you're looking at the Koch postulates of if something causes a disease like a virus, you basically should be able to repeat it, i.e. you should be able to isolate the virus, and then you should be able to inject it in, you know, mice, animal, or preferably a human, but that's unethical. And then that animal would then
automatically get those set of symptoms.
Which unfortunately all the Koch postulates failed with virus theory, and that's sort of been long forgotten and long buried. And at the same time, I say, you also had this terrain theory disease, which actually is really, really simple. It's basically saying, you know, if you have a cell and you have it surrounded in a nice environment, you know, a nice clean environment, you're feeding it good nutrition, good clean air, or etc., or if it's a cell just in a petri dish, then it basically remains disease-free and healthy. Or if you put it, you know, a whole bunch of toxic stuff in it, or perhaps, I don't know, let's say we had dolphins in the ocean and you just dumped a whole load of toxic sewage, you would expect those dolphins to get ill, just like you would expect the cell to get ill. So that's the sort of the other end of it. Now, Big Pharma have pushed the viral theory of disease that basically just says, okay, you get a virus that's going to cause AIDS. You know, they basically blamed AIDS on a virus, SARS. And now, of course, we're in Corona land, that this virus is gonna kill everyone. Yet when you look at all the stats of the people have supposedly been dying in Italy and China. They're basically really generally, actually the Italian ones, they were, I think their average age was 80. They were actually on antiviral drugs. Now, antiviral drugs screw up with all your cellular metabolism. They also had, I think it was on average, 2 other pre-existing conditions. So basically, they didn't die. They're not dying of the. I mean, to say these people died of the virus is pretty gross. It's a complete gross. I don't know.
It's almost a little bit. I mean, what you're really kind of saying is, it's almost like they were really health challenged already, and they went to a restaurant and they ate something and choked on it. And had they been healthier,
that was the straw. That was the straw.
If they'd been healthier, they might have survived the choking. And now we're saying the choking is the cause of death.
Well, and they're completely ignoring their terrain, because I mean, if you actually looked in their blood and their cells, their cellular terrain is going to be pretty
okay,
bad.
So I first read about this back in the in the early 90s, when I went through my own massive health turnaround after being sick for a long, long time. And I was reading a lot about that. And one of the things that stimulated me to read about it was that I was constantly dealing with really terrible throat infections and really terrible sinus infections all the time. So I basically lived with strep. It was just the way it was. And, but I remember one time going in and, they're doing the throat swab and all this kind of stuff. And it's around the time the doctor had ordered me I was 21 years old, and he ordered me to take my tonsils out, which I didn't want to do. I felt like I don't know whether you believe in God or evolution, those tonsils were there for a reason. I didn't want them out. And, but in any event, they did a throat swab and he came back negative for strep throat. Although I had white, big, I had all the symptomology of strep B. And what was really crazy is that years before that, I'd been in a serious fire and I was in the hospital healing from that. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks with surgery and everything else. And when you have had 3rd-degree burns, one of the things they're really concerned with is infection. And I've always wondered, I've always had this feeling like a lot of what we think of as infection is actually outfection. It's something wrong in the body.
Possibly. I mean, it's a bit controversial, but you could say
it is a little controversial.
The infectious myth, and to take it more, well, as we're on the subject, we might as well go there. Again, if you're looking at a cell, now, what does a cell do when it's trying to repair itself and trying to get healthy? It excretes stuff. But it also, in that excretion, it excretes RNA.
See, that's where I was going. When I was in with the burns, they did throat swabs on me as a natural thing. I had no sore throat. I had no infection, nothing. They did the throat swabs and I tested positive for strep, which meant that they then wanted to give me antibiotics, but I had no symptoms of any kind. And so it made me think about this. Wait a second, I can have the symptoms and not the virus. And I can have the virus and not the symptoms. And that to me was a logical flaw.
Yeah, no, well, say the Koch phosphates failed like 70 years ago. It's very, very probable. It's very, very probable. And, who am I to really say this, but it's very probable that toxic cells create viruses themselves. It's a totally known fact that the blood is, full of RNA from excreted cells. And also, what on earth is a virus? It's this unalive, inert piece of RNA. It's not like, it has no life.
And we talk
itself.
about it like it's alive. We talk about killing it with heat. We talk about it wanting to propagate. We refer to it like this living enemy when
it's not created out here. No RNA has ever been discovered outside of the cell. Like, it can't form. The only place it's formed is in the cell. So why on earth is it formed? But why on earth is this viral?
I got to tell you, as much as I'm open to this stuff, I still, I'm a little Newtonian, and I watch something like Ebola escape out of a village in Africa, and you can watch it on the map, and that sort of thing bothers me. But that said, there are cases where this sort of thing. I mean, a really good example is I can't think of his.
It doesn't mean that it's not. It doesn't mean that it isn't a virus or not real. I mean, let's say the cell, creates Ebola. That's not to say that Ebola can't spread and infect other cells.
I've got you. I see what you're saying. So,
but the original source is the original source is a cell, is basically a toxic terrain. I think the two theories are are linked, and I think
That
for whatever
actually,
reason,
I've never heard somebody put it that way. And if you really, there is a major problem here. Like, there's a chicken and egg problem, right? Like, okay, but where did it originate from? From the
yeah,
bat.
exactly.
Okay, but where did the bat get it from? From the flea. Where did the flea get it from? I don't know.
Well,
Whatever.
how, as I say, as it's not alive, RNA can't originate in itself unless you're into the man-made theory. But obviously, that doesn't work 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, the RNA, the virus, it has to be originally created in some cell, unless it's in a lab. But but that obviously didn't happen 100 years ago. So yeah.
Harry, I'm at the point now where, like, we're going to publish this and the two of us are going to disappear 3 weeks later. But, I've observed a couple of things, and then there was a Canadian doctor named Banting, and he was the guy who developed the idea of exogenous insulin, the idea that you could inject insulin into a diabetic. Diabetes is something that's existed for a very long time. The Romans knew about it. They would actually have somebody pee on the ground, and if the ants went to the urine, they knew they had a diabetic condition. So it's something that existed a long time, but Banting came up with the idea that you could inject insulin into a person and help deal with the problem. But you know what else Banting developed? He developed a diet that prevented and turned around type 2 diabetes. But which thing got popular? Well, the thing that you can buy and be on a lifelong subscription for. So I'm absolutely clear that there is hard evidence that industry and profit has made us go down the wrong path. I hesitate to suggest that's what's going on now. I guess we have to ask these questions at time, because there's no question that stuff has happened to us in the past.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, well, especially when you look at the sort of history, I mean, this is getting a little bit controversial, but like if you look at some of these epidemics from before, if we go back to AIDS, so AIDS was like this perfect thing. It's like, take a minority population, like the gay population. Oh, how can we sell them some wonderful drug, wonderful drug, and basically, if we go back to the terrain theory, so there was a certain category within the gay population that were heavily into drugs and going to clubs. This is just incredible, but basically, the side effects, the toxic side effects of poppers, which were really, really popular in those days, are basically skin lesions, and what's the other thing that happens? Oh yeah, and they lose weight, which are basically what AIDS supposedly expressed. And I know, without getting into it, no one's ever linked, and then they could never identify this HIV virus, or they started saying it morphed and changed, but basically in the research they never ever really properly linked HIV to AIDS. And so all this poppers research was it was made up. Someone I knew spoke to the guy who did all that poppers research, but basically, he was asked. He was basically had the funding stopped and said, "No, we've got the answer.
He's got the culprit.
We've got it's HIV. That's what it is. That, and the poppers research got squashed, and then obviously they pushed whatever it was, AZT and all the.
All right. I'm gonna throw out. I'm gonna make this episode completely unpublishable. I'm gonna throw out a couple of observations that I've made. I don't share them very often, but here's two of them. The one is that maize, corn, is an American plant for which sapiens has no real capacity to digest it properly, and wheat is a Middle Eastern thing, and until we could figure out how to grind it and grind it and powderize it, it was not you can't eat a grain of wheat. And so one of the things that I found fascinating is, as the various famines in the 50s and 60s started ripping through Africa, we started sending three surpluses to Africa. One was the dairy surplus. And the vast majority of non-whites are lactose intolerant, never mind the other problems with milk. They also started sending them the grain surplus, because the big grain producing provinces and states in America had huge bags of grain surplus. And then they also started sending the corn surplus, which again is not an evolved natural food. And it strikes me that started happening very heavily in the 60s. And I wonder what would happen if you took an entire continent and started and by the way, just to be clear, when you go to a school in Tanzania, the children go to the school largely because their parents want them to get fed, because the parents can't afford to feed them all, so they send them off to the school. And in the schools, unless it's there's only one school that I know of that doesn't follow this in Tanzania, but they eat cornmeal, gali, wheat meal, morning and night. That's it. There's no vegetables, there's no fresh meat, there's no fruit. It's just cornmeal and wheat meal. So I wonder what would happen to, let's say, a population's entire immune system if you suddenly switched them onto corn, dairy, and wheat when that would never have been part of their history before. Is it possible that you might cause some massive immune system meltdown? Now, that's a little out there, and I'm not blaming this for, I'm not saying that's what created AIDS.
They say that between Europe and the USA, it's like, Europe, the French bread is generally, it's a higher quality of wheat, and the French, when they come to America and eat bread over here and dairy, get all of these allergies, and
I notice it. I don't eat bread, Harry. I haven't eaten bread properly for years. I went to Italy last year. I ate a couple of pizzas. I don't have cheese, so I had them cheeseless. And normally wheat will stimulate in me often stomach problems and very often addiction. Like I need to have it again. None. Yeah. It was very different. But now here's another.
That's durum wheat, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Here's another crazy observation. And I'm not saying that this means anything. It's just an observation I made. You see, when humans first arrived in North America, North America looked like a super Serengeti. They had 11 species, 12 species of elephants roaming around, mammoths, mastodons, and many others. They had rhinos, short-faced bears, dire wolves. They had cats. They had a cheetah. I think it was about the size of an American lion, and it ran really fast. And the place was a super Serengeti. And what we think of as the native North Americans came across, and they came there and found a bunch of animals that had no fear avoidance with humans. They hadn't grown up with humans, so they weren't afraid of them. And so they obliterated them fast. And then they started relying on plant sources. But they're traditionally Africans. That's where humans come from. And they started eating North American plants in a way that they hadn't been at first. And I wonder again, if that's not one of the reasons that they were so quickly devastated by sugar, alcohol, and the various infections that were brought to them by Europeans.
Yeah, I'm sure. The Australian, like the Aborigines, a similar thing happened. Like their gene can't tolerate alcohol, and then anyway, a whole ton of Aboriginal tribes and populations became alcoholics, and it's pretty devastating.
Well, Harry, we'll see if any of this makes it through my editing team if this gets online. But here's the thing. Look. You
can cut out the AIDS bit. The rest is probably okay.
Yeah. But here's the thing is, the one thing that I really got from you today that really bridged something for me is I've understood the difference between the viral theory, the Pasteur kind of view, and the Beauchamp's theory. I've understood those two different theories, and unfortunately, they both make sense to me in different ways. And the gap that you bridged for me today is that. Is the origin of the RNA, origin of the virus. And so maybe they're both right to a degree. And I think that's really valuable. And what that does leave us with is a practical thing. And the practical thing is the degree to which we live psychologically, physiologically, and energetically healthy lives is the degree to which we won't generate those things in our body, and we won't be susceptible to them when they are generated in the population. Does that make sense to you?
That is exactly right. Yeah. You basically want to do everything you can to have really, really healthy cellular terrain.
Eat the right stuff, stay hydrated, get sunlight, move your body, think the right thoughts, direct your focus. If we really pay attention to that stuff, then we obviously massively increase the chances of being healthy. Yeah. Harry, this has been super fun. It's really funny because back at New Year's, you were talking about the devices you guys have made. And I was like, I so wanted to dive in and ask you more about that, but there were any number of reasons, and there was a lot of people why that wasn't the time. So I'm glad that we got to have that conversation. It is stimulating a whole lot more thoughts for me. So
I'll send you a device. That's the best way. I need to scan you.
I would love to be scanned. Scan away.
Yeah. Scan away.
You're not going to hurt my force, are you? My force is important to me.
Well, no, it's the opposite, because we only scan with positive information. So yeah, we're only comparing to optimal.
I'm in for sure. We'll set it up and maybe we'll do a follow-up. Harry, thank you so much. How do our listeners, assuming we make it on the air, how do our listeners find out about you?
Energyforlife.com.
Energyforlife.com. Harry Massey. Harry, it's been a real treat. And I know we keep threatening to kiteboard together one of these days, but we're definitely going to have to make it happen. When this travel ban is all over, come here to Cabarete and let's get some serious kiting underway. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Eric. It's great to be here.